firemen aren't supposed to talk about things.
They're here.
Lifeforce is a 1985 film directed by Tobe Hooper. It was written by Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby, but adapted from the 1976 novel Space Vampires. It's a very strange film, where each act feels like a different genre with wildly disparate tones. It takes inspiration from a wide variety of sources including Alien, Night of the Living Dead, spy thrillers, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This was Hooper's first picture for Cannon Films out of a 3-film deal. It's also arguably responsible for bankrupting the company. The film is an attempt to evoke classic 50s themes, but through the lens of 80s political issues. Hooper was given a $25 million budget, more than twice as much as his previous films, and the source material, but the rest was up to him. There are significant differences from the book, with the most notable being a change in setting, from the then future of the mid-21st century to being a contemporary piece. The film was shot entirely in Britain, a new experience for Hooper, and a far cry from his deeply American roots. It was originally scheduled for a 17-week shoot, but went over budget and over time, taking about 5 months. This was unusual for Hooper, and most likely due to the scale of the film, especially the final act, which depicts a post-apocalyptic London with hordes of pseudo-vampires who function like zombies. The opening of the film feels very Alien-inspired, with a small crew in a retro-futuristic ship investigating a nearby disturbance. Here the grander scope of effects can be seen, with many shots of the alien craft, as well as the astronauts investigating it. While they don't hold up to modern standards, they have a certain charm, especially when they begin to explore the depths of the ship more properly, and they drift through areas that seem more biological in origin, with dozens of floating corpses scattered around. Eventually they come upon a central chamber, and discover 3 naked humans floating in transparent crystals. Here Henry Mancini's score is highlighted, making the moment feel truly epic. He was chosen by Hooper due to his role in classic 50s horror like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, Tarantula, and It Came from Outer Space. Over his career he won 20 Grammy Awards and 4 Academy Awards, and his talent is on display here, combined with the London Symphony Orchestra. Of course, his work is only fully in the international version of the film. There are 3 cuts of Lifeforce. The first, 128 minutes long, never saw the light of day, but was Hooper's preferred cut, featuring more time on the spaceship. The theatrical release, at least in the UK and most territories, was 116 minutes long. For American audiences, this was considered too much, and so a 101-minute version, with partially new score by Michael Kamen and James Guthrie was created. While there are some scenes that benefit from tighter editing, the new score is almost unilaterally worse, and generally the removed scenes expand on the characters, the world, and the overall mood of the film. It's possible the overall reception of it would have been better had the full version been more widely available. Coming back to the aliens, their naked bodies are on full display here, and in many scenes throughout the film. While Hooper's films generally avoid nudity, in this case it fits both the source material and the themes of the film, that being the dangers of sexuality and especially of unprotected sex. The film is largely a reflection of the AIDS epidemic that was sweeping the world during the 1980s, and especially the gay community. There is a heavy focus on male-male contact throughout the film, with a climactic scene in the second act involving a deeply passionate kiss between 2 men in order to bring their true selves to the surface. The end results of the aliens' kiss also resemble the desiccated bodies of people dying from HIV. At the same time, they become carriers of the violence and try to make immediate physical contact with whoever is nearest to them when they wake. In the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Sawyers are asexual creatures, using torture and violence as their own substitute. In Salem's Lot, the Dracula XB has become a disgusting Nosferatu-esque creature. Generally, the villains in Hooper's films have a disconnect from desires. And with that in mind, Lifeforce feels like a rejection or reaction to the contents of those films, and even future in his filmography. That's not to say that Hooper's films are entirely asexual, but they frequently avoid the topic. However, this film also deals with what can generally be called the male gaze. As stated previously, one of the aliens is in the form of a woman, and almost every male character makes a comment about her appearance. It's later revealed that she was not fully formed until the protagonist, Tom Carlson, observed her, then became something that perfectly fits his desires. The film is either a straight-faced example of, or a commentary on, the idea of men hating women. The female alien is a seductress, forcing the male characters who have been wooed by her looks to sabotage themselves and others, and eventually she literally drains their life. Her entire purpose is to manipulate men into doing her bidding. At the same time, despite being naked for most of the first act, she is a sexless being. Her breasts are displayed prominently and frequently, but her and the male's genitals are never seen, making them more like dolls, designed for male attention without any unnecessary bits. In addition to the physical naked woman, many of the sci-fi elements appear either yonic or phallic. The spaceship that the crew originally excavated is effectively a giant sperm, and the entrance has fleshy red folds which lead to warm inner cavities. There are also many scenes involving penetration, both male and female, and the expressions of the characters and emotions create the odd dynamic where the film is both intensely sexual and terrified of the act itself. In the film, sex is referred to as taking or giving life energy, that rather than something that creates or has the potential to create life, instead, it takes it. This further reinforces the homosexual subtext, where to some it was considered sinful or sacrilegious because of that very fact. However, in Lifeforce, all sexual activity is painful or deadly, and it is talked about in those terms. We can also look at a scene towards the end of the film, after the infection is spread. One of the protagonists, which is its own complicated matter, has arranged a meeting with the Prime Minister. They recognize that he has been turned, and it's been shown that vampires have to feed or they will die, which is also why the spread has been so rapid. He requests that his receptionist come with him into a private room where he effectively rapes her, while the other two men simply stand back and watch, unwilling to put themselves in danger to stop it. A woman is sacrificed for the greater good by a man in a position of power. Of course, despite all the attention paid to the female vampire, and she is the primary antagonist, there were two other male vampires who function very similarly. They attempt to seduce the guards, although their advances are met with machine gun fire rather than acceptance. Despite this, they manage to infect one of the soldiers, who then passes it on until eventually they cause the destruction of London, infecting exponentially. Coming back to the original discovery of the aliens, they say they took on forms that would appeal to the astronauts. Of the four investigating, 3 are men and 1 is a woman, and given the typical heteronormative experience, it would be expected there would be more women than men, but that's not the case. While the film doesn't delve too deeply into it, there's certainly the implication that the crew has members that are gay or bisexual, and that plays into their experience with the vampires. Dr. Leonard Bukowski, a researcher, discovers the way to permanently put down the male vampire by driving a long metal shaft into an area below the heart. Of course, in doing this, he himself has become infected and is subsequently killed. The metaphors are very thinly stretched at this point, and the subtext has become text. Coming back to the idea of multiple protagonists, this is largely due to the unique structure of the film. It begins with the cold open with a group of astronauts. None of them seem particularly central, it is simply the inciting incident. Then we jump to a month later and follow some explorers who have found the destroyed spacecraft. Then there is a group of men in a room discussing the events. Then finally, nearly half an hour into the film, we meet Colonel Kane, who is the protagonist for the next half hour or so. Another 15 minutes later, and Tom Carlson is introduced, the sole survivor of the first mission. Initially, we're unclear of his role, as he's definitely lying about some things, but after a psychic wet dream from the female vampire, he takes the lead on tracking her through the British countryside. Due to her ability to body hop, this has a few complications, although they do eventually recover her in Patrick Stewart's body. Eventually, Carlson and Kane become dual protagonists, taking up about equal screen time. The film as a whole is difficult to evaluate. It changes tone, theme, and aesthetic so frequently that sometimes it's hard to tell that it's even the same movie, but it's ultimately underlined by many of Hooper's common aesthetics, ideas, and idiosyncrasies. It is certainly entertaining, and while the final act may not work on every level, it's such a wild swing that it's a sight to behold. It would be amiss to call it a great film, or even a good film, but it's a fascinating one. Colin Wilson, the author of the source material, called it the worst movie ever made, but said, at least there's a lot of full frontal nudity. Other critics were not quite as adversarial, but it received fairly mixed reviews. It's currently at 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is just on the cusp of rotten. Even negative reviews often commented on the visuals and scope, while lamenting the silliness, fragmented plot, and unremarkable characters. Hooper said in an interview about a year after the film's release, Lifeforce had a great look, but lacked a screenplay. There was a hell of a lot that could be done about that, except to change it completely. The film started off as Space Vampires, and that's actually what it should have been called. With that title, you'd look at the picture with a completely different set of sunglasses. As for the commercial success, it was similarly poor. In total, it made around $11 million at the US box office, less than half its budget. While it's not fair to say this was responsible for Canon, its distributors' downfall, It certainly wasn't the cinematic sci-fi event of the 80s that they were hoping for. It was one of a long string of failures, including properties that were developed but never materialized, including Spider-Man, Barbie, and adaptations of the stage plays Zorba and American Buffalo. Just 2 years after Lifeforce was released, the company sold its assets to Warner Bros. Lifeforce is certainly one of Hooper's most unique films, and has become somewhat of a cult classic in recent years, although some of the appreciation is certainly ironic. Despite its fantastical premise, it is firmly rooted in the 1980s and works as a remarkable time capsule of the period. It's missing something to tie it all together in a neat bow, but that was almost inevitable. The next film that Hooper worked on was similarly a 50s-inspired sci-fi tale, but one with a lot less scale or ambition. That's it for today, though. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and, as always, be well.